So today let's take a look at Gandhi and King, their teachings, because I think that their teachings pose for us, or their philosophies pose for us, or they pose questions for us in how we respond to today's world. Gandhi and King stand as two shining examples for our time. They were visionaries, they were dreamers who lived by the conviction that meeting violence with nonviolence, hatred with love, and oppression with love for the oppressor. Both Gandhi and King believed that the future of mankind lies in solving problems, national, international problems, through courageous, nonviolent actions. Both had a strong belief in humanity's deep sense of morality and goodness. So our question today: are the principles and teachings of Gandhi and King sustainable in a technological world seeking social justice and economic equity for all? And this is really a very, very heavy and loaded question. Because our world, it seems to me, and someone mentioned, our world is more complex today than it ever was. In Gandhi's time, we were talking about the colonial influences. When I was at Teachers College, I remember one day, and I'm talking about 1961, 62, being in one of those rooms, something similar to this, where we went to have coffee, and where you had to cut your way through the smoke to reach the coffee machine. Do you remember those days when everybody smoked in this room, the staff room, or the whatever the coffee room, the place was? And I'm not too sure what it was, but I was humming a song. And there were about 7 people in the room. We all came from different countries, different places, and we all knew the song. Because we were all educated in a colonial setting, where we learned the rule, Britannia ruled the waves. And whether you were from India, you were from Pakistan, you were from Australia, you were from whatever part of Africa that was part of the colonial thing, or you were from the Caribbean, as I was, everybody knew the song. Because the arm of Britain extended just about everywhere. Most of us, and I think if I go around the room, and some of you come from different places, we would have had similar education, simply because the textbooks, in many cases, carried the same kind of information. And so we had that arm of the British Empire. In today's world, that simplicity and that way of who was it? Was it Churchill who said the sun never rises or never sets or whatever on the empire? That is no longer so. And if we were to go around the world, what we see happening are strong men, the Philippines, the Assads, the Trumps. In Venezuela, I just lost his name as I was about to call him, Maduro. As we look around the world, we see a whole different, the complexity of things. And then we look at the social media, the technological world. Maybe some of you have been in touch with someone on the other side of the world before you came here this morning, through social media, through Facebook, through Twitter, through Instagram. The way that we were able, or they were able to organize and come in to think about it, when we look at the April Spring, or the spring in what took place in the Middle East, what was able to draw people out in large numbers was social media. And then I look at the way that Martin Luther King was able to get the crowds out for the marches, or Gandhi was able to get people to the salt mines and in large numbers out to protest the plight of the underprivileged. It seemed to me that there was more on the ground wanting to do things and people motivated to get out there. The complexity of our own lives. If I were to say to you tomorrow we're going to go and march against whatever, you have to look at your calendar. You have to say, I'm not too sure I could do this tomorrow morning. That ability to mobilize people, or to have people care about issues. And someone like myself always feels so concerned when someone says, I'm not going to vote because they're all crooks, they're all corrupt, they're all liars, they're all dishonest. I'm just going to take myself out of all of this. And so there are all kinds of questions around how we mobilize, how we get people together, how we get people to be concerned about those issues. And another aspect of this is always the question that I find people ask today, what is in it for me? Where is that common good? Where is that I'll do this not for me, but I do this for the cause. I do this for the group. I do this because others would benefit as a result of my action. We can talk about the era, the period, the time in which Gandhi was operated, when he was born, and the fact that he went to law school, he traveled to South Africa thinking that he'd get a law practice there. The discrimination that occurred to him on his way to India, to South Africa on the train, the discrimination and the apartheid and other things that happened in South Africa, and how that influenced him. We can go back again and look at the man himself, engaged at age 7, arranged marriage, married by age 13. The fact that he lost his dad, all of those emotional things that became part of his thinking. Looking at the world not just through the eyes of his own religious background and religion, but seeing it in a broader sense and taking to himself things from Christianity and from other religious philosophies and imprinting that on his own thinking. And so when we are looking at where Gandhi is and where King, coming from a background as a Baptist minister, trained in the black church, and the black church in the United States has its own parameters, its own philosophy. Having been embedded in theology, his father having been a minister also. So his household and his circle were all within that Baptist minister, Baptist religious philosophy. This belief in a Jesus who is a savior, this belief in the personification of God. And then Gandhi's philosophy coming through folks who were writing and speaking about what was going on in India and comparing that with what was happening in the United States. Slavery, the oppression of the African people who were enslaved, who were brought to work in the cotton fields in the South, who were sold on blocks. And when emancipation did come about, were told goodbye. The slave owners were paid large sums of money for the loss of their labor. They were compensated. And those who were enslaved were told, fend for yourself. And the issue of housing, the issue of employment, discrimination, all those things that faced the African Americans were the concern of King. And ways and means to rectify, to alleviate, to bring about some justice for Black Americans, to take them out of what he saw, the comparison with the caste system and those who were at that level that Gandhi was fighting for, and comparing that to that situation in the US, and ensuring that there were some answers. And what can you do as a pastor? What can you do as you gathered people? How can you keep motivating them and showing them instances of what Gandhi was able to do? King, on the other hand, believed that there was some responsibility on the part of the federal government, on the part of governments, to make it right. And so his pressure point was really to provoke and to make sure that the resistance was against government policies. So there we see a little slight verge in terms of the principles of King and at the same time Gandhi. King had the opportunity to go to India on the invitation of the government. But he said he went, and what affected him was not so much the government or seeing whatever, but if he felt that it was like a pilgrimage to him. He said, to other countries I may go as a tourist, but to India I come as a pilgrim. This is because India means to me, Mahatma Gandhi, a truly great man of the age. King heard about Gandhi from the president of Howard University. He had gone to Howard. The president was Dr. Mordecai Johnson, who had returned from India, had seen and had read and had some experience of what was happening in India. And so in speaking to Dr. King about Gandhi's work around civil disobedience, Gandhi's spiritual leadership, knowing that King himself considered himself a spiritual leader, some what he called pacifist techniques that helped him to bring about some change for the disadvantaged communities in India. And so when King visited, I think it was 1959, they said he bought every book and every writing and every script and every piece of paper that he could find that had anything of Gandhi's teaching. And he tried to link some of the things that he was learning with the whole issue of what he was attempting to do at the time, the bus boycott, the issue of civil disobedience, the sit-in in restaurants and other places, sit there until you are served. Even if they pull you off the stool, you continue to sit. Even if they beat you on the head, you continue to sit. And when you can't take any more, somebody else comes in and take the seat. And all of that he learned from the teachings of Gandhi. And Gandhi became for him the kind of measuring rod. The measuring rod, except for King. He was grappling with the whole business of physical suffering. Many of you know that Gandhi suffered. He dressed in whatever. He walked barefoot. He walked for miles and miles on end. King was always in his suit and tie. King was always not into the physical suffering. And when King walked, it was not just as Gandhi walking ahead of the masses that were following. If you notice in any of the marches, there was always a line of people with names, people who were influencers, who were standing with King. King was convinced that nonviolent resistance is the most potent weapon available to oppress people. And he saw that in that struggle for freedom, that when people resisted nonviolently, and I'm sure all of us have pictures in our heads of people being dragged, and we see some of that nonviolent resistance today in campaigns, with movements around, whether it's union activities, whether it's resisting whatever one is protesting about, just letting yourself be pulled and tugged and beaten and pushed and abused and not retaliating. So they saw that as very, very powerful messages. At the same time, when we do that comparison, that contrast, compare and contrast King and the movement and what was established in the US and what we still talk about, the Montgomery bus boycott, King ultimately believed that the Gandhian approach of nonviolent resistance would bring about a solution to the race problems in North America, in the United States. At the same time, realizing that he himself had his own challenges, he himself had to be constantly doing that self-examination. As someone said the other day, the measure of whatever they do, they ask the question, what would Jesus say? What would Jesus do? And King was always asking that question. What would Gandhi? And how would Gandhi? So that the Gandhian way, the principles, the beliefs, the teachings were very much what led, what helped, and what motivated a lot of the things that King did and that King believed in. Gandhi studied law, so his knowledge was also based in law. He knew, and he was going to South Africa to practice law. So it was the British legal system. King was not a lawyer. King believed that the law needed to be changed in the US, or the laws needed to be such that people can call on those lawmakers to make the changes. So a lot of the things, whether it was the march in Washington, the big speech of I Had a Dream, all of this was appealing to those lawmakers to ensure that he can touch that inner core that Gandhi spoke about to make that difference. That society based on compassion, based on love, based on understanding, based on mutual respect, based on nonviolence, was really very difficult, and still today is very difficult in a situation where armies, military, police, the strength of the state could be brought to bear. And so, looking at both situations, situation in India, situation in the United States, situation with the position of the state, Gandhi considered himself more or less stateless, or did not believe that the state should have a role in the life of individuals. King, on the other hand, thought the state had a responsibility. And we can go into all kinds of discussions around that, because the bringing of the Africans to the United States had something to do, again, with state support, government policies, the issue of employment, labor force, addition of labor force, all of those were factors. Returning hate for hate multiplies hate. Adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, Only love can do that. Both men spent time in prison. Gandhi was in prison for 7 years? Martin Luther King was in prison and out, in prison and out. He was also accompanied in this search with competent lawyers. He also had the power of the state, the Attorney General. If you remember, Robert Kennedy was very much a supporter of some of the ideals that he wanted to see accomplished. And these men had opportunities while they were imprisoned to be reflective. Some of King's best letters were written while he was on the inside. And there is one that I quote all the time. This is one of my favorite, a passage where he talked about, we will not remember the words of our detractors, but we will always remember the silence of our friends. And that is heavy stuff. Because to say nothing is really to say something. To stand back and do nothing is really to do something. And so they knew what being isolated meant. They knew what the power and force of the state can do. And they knew that in order to be a leader, in order to be able to move people forward, and I think Gandhi would argue against the fact that he was a leader. I'm one of you, I'm one among you. King saw leadership more in terms of, I am here and I can provide support and direction. And so in the times of isolation, at times when the state force was used against them, there were opportunities for reflection and opportunities to mobilize so that they could move forward. Independence could be achieved by economic freedom and self-sufficiency. I think King was not really talking so much about independence as he was talking about freedom. Freedom for each and every individual to be a citizen of the United States. He wanted to ensure that there were no first-class citizen and second-class citizen, that there were no oppressed people and people who were oppressing others. And so it depends on how you go back and forth with the work of both men. We can see the similarities, but we can also see nuances. And the nuanced difference has to do with the fact that there were different societies and the causes and the issues were a bit different. Well, there would also be the argument that um, the power we have through the vote and the selection we make of people that we send to represent us. I think what we see happening in the United States, and where maybe people of good conscience seem to support and be surrogates for what their president is doing and saying, simply because they want to be reelected. It's not, let me stand by my moral, a kind of moral code. It's just, I need to be reelected, and if I have to say or do certain things or support certain kinds of, I will. So that brings us to some of the strategies that maybe both King and Gandhi used, and that is to show up, to show what it was like, so that when there were things in the society, they provoked certain instances. So the police would come in and start bashing, and the cameras would come in, and the world would see. Because in a lot of instances, that's what we're trying to do now by the marches, the women getting out there, different groups doing this, is really to show the world. So I can't get there and knock at the door and say, Mr. President, but maybe I could organize, and I can provoke some instances where the world would have an opportunity to see. But even the whole issue of Rosa Parks and not giving up her seat on the bus, he didn't direct her to do that, but they saw the opportunity with her being arrested, and she called and said, guess where I am, and using that opportunity for the bus boycott and that whole situation that developed and gave such bad, what should I say, bad press, as it were, to...
But I also love the King's book is not fight toward freedom, it's not march toward freedom, it's let's stride
yes,
toward
stride.
freedom. Right?
Yes.
There's a dignity to it as well.
Yes. And so that is the message of hope to people of goodwill, the message that we need. Our country, Canada, has not been immune to the bad things that have happened in the past. But hopefully there are lessons there, and gradually we're learning a few things as we move along so that we won't repeat some of the things of the past. And so again, we have to look and be hopeful. I mean, Obama's big thing was the lessons of hope. And the word hope and peace and justice have been with us throughout. And I think we just have to be people of goodwill, people who are hopeful for a better tomorrow.